Rome was not destroyed by barbarians. It destroyed itself. And the way it happened should make every person alive right now sit up and pay attention. Because the forces that brought down the most powerful civilization the Western world has ever produced are not unique to Rome. They are not ancient, and they did not stay in the past. But before we get there, let us talk about what Rome actually was, because most people have no idea. At its peak, Rome controlled roughly 20% of the entire human population on Earth. It stretched from the north of England to the edges of modern-day Iraq, from the Rhine River in Germany to the Sahara Desert in Africa. And it was not just big, it was sophisticated in ways that would not be matched again for over 1,000 years after it fell. Rome had running water piped directly into homes, a sewage system, a road network so well engineered that many of those roads still exist today, a professional standing army, a postal service, public hospitals, free grain distributed to citizens who could not afford food. Rome had a welfare state. In the ancient world, 2,000 years ago, the city of Rome itself, at its peak, housed over 1 million people, the largest city on Earth, a place so extraordinary that no European city would match its population size for over 1,000 years after it collapsed. This was not primitive. This was the peak of human civilization at that moment in history. And understanding how completely it fell apart is one of the most important things you can do if you want to understand the world you live in right now. So what went wrong? Everything. Slowly. All at once. The first crack was political. In the 250 years between 235 AD and 284 AD, Rome had over 50 different emperors. Most of them were assassinated. Many ruled for less than a year, some for less than a month. Think about what that does to a civilization. Every time a new emperor seized power, the entire administrative structure shifted. Policies reversed overnight. The people who knew how things worked kept getting purged and replaced. Institutional knowledge, the quiet, accumulated understanding of how to run a complex society, kept getting destroyed and rebuilt from scratch. The second crack was economic. Rome began quietly reducing the silver content of its coins to pay for the ballooning cost of government and military. At its peak, a Roman silver coin was 85% silver. By the late 3rd century, that number had fallen to around 5%, sometimes less. The result was inflation so severe it began breaking the economy at its foundations. Prices rose faster than wages. Trade became unreliable. The middle class was slowly wiped out. And as the middle class shrank, wealth concentrated at the extremes. A small number of enormously rich landowners accumulated more and more, while ordinary Romans fell into poverty and dependence. The gap between the richest and poorest Romans became so extreme that the social contract holding the empire together began to dissolve. The math stopped working. And when the math stops working in a civilization, the civilization starts dying. Now here is where the outside world enters the story. For most of Rome's history, the barbarian tribes beyond its borders were fragmented and containable. The Roman military was so superior that it could hold the borders with a fraction of the manpower that would have been needed against an organized opponent. But two things changed that. First, the climate cooled across Eurasia. Harvests failed. Populations that had been stable for generations faced starvation. And when people starve, they move. The Huns began pushing westward with enormous force, driving the Germanic tribes, the Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, into Roman territory in massive, desperate waves. These were not the scattered tribes Rome had managed for centuries. These were enormous groups of people with nothing to lose pressing against borders that a weakened, broke, politically unstable Rome could no longer hold. Second, Rome made a critical mistake. Rather than holding the barbarians out entirely, Rome began allowing large groups to settle inside the empire in exchange for military service. It seemed practical. The army needed soldiers, the barbarians needed land. But over time, the Roman army became less Roman. Barbarian commanders rose to senior positions. Soldiers whose loyalty was to their own people rather than to Rome made up more and more of the legions. The army defending Rome was increasingly staffed by people who had no particular reason to. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, a foreign enemy walked through the gates of the Eternal City. In 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus, was quietly deposed by a barbarian general who simply saw no reason to appoint a replacement. And with that, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. Now here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. Political leaders more focused on holding power than solving problems. Check. Currency losing its value while the cost of government keeps rising. Check. A shrinking middle class squeezed between extreme wealth and extreme poverty. Check. Military commitments stretched across too many fronts with not enough resources. Check. Climate-driven mass migration overwhelming existing systems and borders. Check. A population that has lost faith in its institutions. Check. I am not saying history is repeating itself. The differences between ancient Rome and the modern world are enormous and important, and any historian will rightly tell you that direct comparisons are complicated. But I am saying that the forces that destroyed Rome were not unique to Rome. They were the natural consequences of specific choices made by specific people over a long period of time. And the most dangerous thing about Rome's collapse is that it did not feel like a collapse to the people living through it. It felt like normal times. Difficult maybe, uncertain perhaps, but basically normal. Right up until it was not. Rome lasted 300 years after it started declining. It had so much accumulated strength, so much institutional wealth and cultural identity, that it kept functioning long after the foundations had cracked beyond repair. But foundations matter. Nobody woke up one morning and decided to let Rome fall. They just kept assuming someone else would fix it later. The inflation would sort itself out. The political instability was temporary. The borders would hold. Someone smarter would come along and put it all back together. Nobody did. The most powerful civilization the Western world has ever seen ended not with a dramatic final battle, but with a quiet bureaucratic decision when a barbarian general saw no reason to keep pretending there was still an empire worth leading. Not with a bang, with a shrug. Rome thought it was eternal. They all do.